Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be going over dependency injection and dipping our toes into the services layer. Alright, let's get started. Alright, so in dependency injection, there are 3 lifetimes that we use to manage the lifetimes of our services that we register. They are transient, scoped, and singleton. So with a transient service, every time you request an instance of that service, a new instance is created. An example of that might be like a logger, right? So every time you request a logger, a new instance of that logger is created. Then we have scoped. Every time you request an instance of a scoped service, that same instance will be reused as long as you're in the same HTTP request. One example of that is like the database context that we registered in the last video. Every time we request a database context throughout the scope of a single HTTP request, we'll get that same instance of our database context back, right? Then we have a singleton, which is just a single instance of the service, and it will be used across the entire application. It doesn't matter what user is making a request. It doesn't matter what request is being made. The same instance of a singleton service will be used every single time. One instance of that would be like a configuration object that might hold like your connection strings or something like that. That would be a singleton. All right, so properties of a transient service is that they are stateless, so they don't need to remember anything about what was going on before. They are lightweight, right, because they're going to be created multiple times potentially throughout the state of a single HTTP request, so they need to be lightweight and easy to create. One example would be, like I said earlier, a logger. So a scoped service, it has state, and that's why we want to share it across the single HTTP request. It's not something that's usually so expensive that it needs to be stored in a single instance across the application like a singleton service. It just has some state that can be shared amongst the HTTP request. When I say HTTP request, that's just in ASP.NET Core. If you're using dependency injection inside of like a console app, for instance, then we would be dealing with scopes, which is what the HTTP request uses behind the scenes as scopes. That's why the service is called a scoped service. And then we have our singleton services. They're either expensive to spin up multiple copies or it has some kind of global state. Again, an instance would be a configuration object, which we can use to share different configuration things across our application. And since our entire application shares the same configuration, we would register that configuration as a singleton service to avoid spinning up multiple copies and reading the configuration files over and over again. Alright, let's jump into some code where we can practice some of this stuff a little bit. Alright, so here we are in our Microblogger API project, and we are going to create a couple of throwaway services that we can use to kind of demonstrate the different lifetimes of the dependency injection and stuff. So inside of microblogger.api, I'm going to create a new folder, and it's just going to be called services. And then inside of here, I'm going to make a new folder just called throwaway, because I am going to be using the services folder later, but I want to be able to easily delete any of the code that we're not going to need. Alright, so inside of here, I'm going to register or create a new file. This is going to be an interface. I don't think we've really used a lot of interfaces. An interface is simply a contract that says what methods and properties a class should contain and what those methods will take in, what they'll return. We'll be using a lot of interfaces throughout this project, so we'll get pretty familiar with them. So what we're going to do for now, one thing to note about interfaces is in .NET, they start with a capital I by convention. So yeah, we're going to create an interface and we're going to call it I state generator, or no, I identity generator. Right, so what all this is going to do is this is going to have a property, which will be a GUID, and this will just be called state, and we'll have a getter on it. And that's it, right? So with this interface, we're going to be able to see the different service lifetimes in action. All right, so now we're going to make a new file, and it's going to be a class, and it's going to be identity generator. And just like when we inherited from a class, we're going to implement an interface now, specifically our identity generator interface. And you'll see here it's giving us a little error. That's just because we haven't implemented the interface members. So let's go ahead and do that. Implement interface. So all this interface has to have is this public GUID called state, right? So let's go ahead and generate something. We'll just call private GUID state equals GUID.newGUID. So every time this state variable is created, we will have a new GUID assigned to it. And then in this GUID state, we're just going to return underscore state. Let's see, what does it want us to do here? Make field read-only. Sure, we'll make it read-only. All right, so now we just need to consume this throwaway service from somewhere, right? So let's go into our controllers. We've got our weather forecast controller from before. And we can, here inside of our hello, we can kind of show how that I identity generator works. So to do that, we'll add a variable here. It'll be a private read-only identity generator. Identity generator, right? And then this is where the dependency injection comes into play. So you see here in our constructor, we're requesting an iLogger weather forecast controller logger. And the dependency injector will look at the constructor here and see what it's asking for, and it will attempt to resolve that service of that type, right? So we're just going to tell it, oops, identity generator, and then identity generator is equal to identity generator. And then we'll just go here and we'll say identity generator dot state. All right. So we use our identity generator, and you know what? Let's go ahead and run it. So you see here, we're inside of microblogger.api. So if we just do our .NET watch and wait for it to build, there we go. Then we can just go into here and we'll try it out. And you see here, we actually got a 500 error because unable to resolve service for type identity generator. Right, so what that means is that we know we want an identity generator because we told it here in the constructor that we need one. But we haven't told it what an identity generator is, right? It's just an interface, and you can't instantiate an interface because it's just a contract. It's not an actual physical thing. So what we have is this identity generator that we wrote, but as you see here, 0 references. We haven't actually used it anywhere. So let's go into our program.cs, right where we added our DB context. By the way, when we added our DB context, it has an optional service lifetime option, and you see it defaults to scope. So this is a scoped service for us, but we could make it transient. I don't think we could make it singleton, but we might be able to. I don't know that you would want to do that, but it is an option. So we're just going to do, for now, builder.services.add transient, right? And we need two things here. We need the type that we are registering for, so identity generator, because that's what we're requesting inside of our constructor here, is our identity generator. And then we need to tell it what type to resolve it to. So that's going to just be identity generator. And then parentheses semicolon. And then we're going to need to go down here and hit Control R to reboot the whole application. All right, let's go back over to Swagger and try this out again. And then you see it says, "Hello, Nick," then a GUID. Great. So what happens if we execute it again? Will we get the same GUID or will we get a different GUID? Oh, you can see here that we got a different GUID. That's because this is currently a transient service. So we could actually, yeah, let's do it. We could actually make it so we get multiple identity generators. So if we just go in here from services, identity generator. So the dependency injector doesn't just work from the constructor. It can also work within the method parameters. I don't typically do that. I think it gets a little messy and hard to read, but for the purposes of demonstration, we're going to do that here. Other identity generator. Then we'll say other identity generator dot state. So now it's going to, oh, and then we'll hit Control R to reboot it. And then we'll go over here. And then we'll go to our hello endpoint again. We'll try it out. All right, so we're outputting two different GUIDs. Well, two GUIDs from two instances of the identity generator interface. So as you can see, they're different, and that's because they are registered as transients. So every time we request an identity generator, it gives us a new instance. So what if we wanted these to be the same? Well, we could go into our program.cs, and instead of adding transient, we could add scoped. Because remember, within one HTTP request or one scope of dependency injection, we'll get the same identity generator now every time. And then we need to restart the app with Control R again. Then we go here, try it out. Name is Nick. Execute. And now you can see here, these are actually the same GUID. Which makes sense because it's one HTTP request. So it's going to be one GUID across both invocations of that state object. However, if we execute it again, we get a different GUID. Okay, so what would we do if we wanted it to be the exact same every time? Well, then we could do add singleton and restart with Control R. All right, then we go here, try it out. All right, now you see here they're both still the same, but if we hit execute again, it's the same every single time. And that's because we have just a single instance of this object. And so its state property is the same every single time. Right. So that's great. That's kind of some theory. But what can we do with that? Well, we can actually, let's write a service that will create a post in our database. Right? So we're going to just create inside of our services a new folder, call it posts, new file, interface, iPost service. All right. So now, what we're going to do for now is we're going to just write a single method, and what it's going to do is take in all of the stuff that we need to create a post, and then it's going to return the ID of that post. That's it. This will also be heavily modified in an upcoming video. But for now, we're going to make it return a task of GUID, create post async. All right, so let's take a quick look at our data contract in our entities and our post. So we need an ID, which we don't need to set that. That'll be automatically generated, but we need text, user handle is published. So string text, string user handle, pool is published. Right. So, and then we also want what's called a cancellation token. Now, what a cancellation token does is, since tasks are potentially long-running things, they could potentially be running for a very long time. And a user might get tired of waiting on our API. Hopefully not, but this could happen. And so they cancel their web request. And this cancellation token, if we pass it all the way down, will know to stop saving things to the database and return back to the user. I'm going to hit A for always restart the app. All right, now inside of this post, we're going to create our post service. Oops, and it's a class. And it's called post service, right? And then we're going to implement the iPost service. The reason we're putting interfaces on top of all of this stuff is it makes it way easier to test. So in an upcoming video about unit tests, you'll see the value, hopefully, in throwing an interface on top of everything. So we're going to call our microblogger context, right? And then we have this create post method. So we can just say var post is equal to new post. And it has text equal to text. User handle is equal to user handle. And is published is equal to is published. Right, so we've created a post. Now what we have to do is we have to add it to Entity Framework so that it knows that the post exists. So we can just await context.posts.add async post cancellation token. So this is why we have this cancellation token, so we can pass it to add async. So now it's added to our Entity Framework store, but we're not done yet. All right. There's two more things we need to do here, one of which is we need to just return post.id to return that GUID. But if we were to run that right now, that wouldn't give us the post's real ID. Because while the post has been added to the Entity Framework store, we haven't saved it to the database yet. So how do we do that? It's very simple. It's just await context.save changes async cancellation token. And I should note it's entirely fine to not have the cancellation token. Well, it's not fine, it's less than ideal, but it will work without the cancellation token. But imagine you're on the Microblogger website and you hit submit and you're like, wait, I didn't want to post that. And you hit the stop button in your browser. You're expecting it at that point to cancel, to stop what you did. Without the cancellation token, it won't do that. With the cancellation token, it will. As long as you're, faster than the database server, which is pretty fast. All right. So we can create this post and we can get the ID back. So let's go back into our program.cs. And just like we registered our identity generator, we need to register our post service. Builder.services.add scoped. I usually default to scoped, especially if it's something that's going to depend on the database context. I usually will use scoped instead of transient. You actually can't use singleton with a database context because the database context is registered as scoped. So it can only be used from a scoped or transient service, because otherwise, if you wanted to use it from a singleton service, you would need a single instance of your database context to persist across the entire application. And we just don't have that. iPost service, post service. All right. So now we've got this registered, and it has one dependency. Go to definition, the microblogger context, but we already registered that with this builder.services.addDB context up above on line 9. So the dependency injector will see, oh, hey, something requires the post service, or the iPost service rather. It'll say, we require the iPost service. Well, we resolve that to post service. Okay, what does the post service need? It needs a database context. Well, that's up here, so I can grab it from here. And it'll all be good to go. So let's go back into our weather forecast controller. And we are going to add right here a private read-only iPost service, post service. And then right here, I'm going to break this down onto a new line. iPost service, post service. Post service is equal to post service, right? So now we can use this method here. I'm going to delete this. And we are going to create a new post based off of this user's name. So var post ID is equal to await post service dot create post async. The text is going to be hard coded to be hello world because this is the hello world endpoint. User handle, we're just going to use whatever name they pass in. And is published, we're going to say true. And then where do we get our cancellation token from? Well, we can get it from http context.request aborted. So this is a cancellation token that gets passed in anytime you hit the stop button in your browser, like this. See if we refresh this. Okay, this is too fast. But this stop, or this refresh button becomes a stop if you're fast enough. So if the user hits that stop button, it will request that the request be aborted. So that's the cancellation token that we use. All right, then we can just say return your post ID is post ID. Oh yeah, and since this is async, it needs to return a task string because it's a potentially long-running thing. And then we need to reboot it. All right, so you don't have to do this part, but I'm going to open up our Microblogger DB, select star from posts. And you see we have 0 rows returned. All right. So now if we go to get weather forecast hello, we try it out, and we say Nick, execute. Your post ID is this, right? So then we go in here and we hit F5 again, and you see we have a post containing the text hello world from the user handle Nick, which is published, and it has that same ID. So if we wanted to make sure it was that one, we could say where ID equals and paste that in there. And you see it gives us the same result back. If we add another character to it, then we get no rows returned. All right. So that is a really quick look at dependency injection. We're going to start actually building out our services in the next video. We're going to get into unit testing. It's going to be some very exciting stuff. So I hope I can catch you guys in the next one. All right, thanks. Bye.